Welcome to the EcoMindset. At a time when the climate is crumbling, inequality is on the rise, and our leaders are beating the drums of war, let's talk about the issues, the solutions, and the power dynamics that got us here. All over the world, people are getting involved. The resistance is growing, and progress is within reach. Join us to discover, to debate, and to learn about the ongoing struggle for the environment, for peace, and for social justice in Quebec, Canada, and around the world. My name is Alex Tyrrell, and I'm your host for this podcast, The EcoMindset. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this first English episode of the EcoMindset podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the Fairview Forest, a very large forest located on the West Island of Montreal, one of the last remaining forests in this community that's been highly developed. Unfortunately, the city of Pointe-Claire and Cadillac Fairview would like to build a huge development in one of these last remaining forests on the western half of the island of Montreal. There's been an incredible mobilization to protect this forest. There's been citizens who have been protesting outside in the cold, in the heat, for 167 weeks to try and draw an attention to this forest and the need to protect it. I'm going to be speaking with Geneviève Lussier, who is leading up this citizen coalition, and also with the Mayor of Pointe-Claire, who was elected on a promise of protecting this green space and has had really somewhat of a difficult time pushing this forward with all kinds of pressure from developers and other people on the city council. So it's going to be an interesting episode about what people can do to stand up for green space that they want to protect, and what people can do if they choose to run for office in order to protect that space. So today we have Geneviève Lussier with us. Geneviève is a resident of Pointe-Claire and somebody who's been very highly involved in protecting the Fairview Forest. In fact, the group that she's a part of, Save the Fairview Forest, has protested every Saturday for 168 weeks in front of the forest to try and draw attention to it and to have the space protected. So thank you, Geneviève, for all of your hard work and for coming on the EcoMindset podcast. Could you start off by telling us why the forest is important?
It's interesting, as a resident of Pointe-Claire, I don't live in the area where the forest is, so I didn't really pay attention to it. I always knew it was there, but it wasn't on the forefront of my mind or my worries until the REM started doing work in the corner of the forest. And at that point, my attention was kind of grabbed by this issue, and since then we've found out how amazing the forest is, how biodiverse, how special it is. First and foremost, it's the last piece of green space in that area. It's a connecting natural space between La Salorme and Bois-de-Liesse. It mitigates the heat island. It's a huge heat island in that area because it's Pointe-Claire city center. So it's very highly asphalted and concrete based in that area. So it is a heat island mitigator for the area. Recently, last October, Terra Humana did an amazing study on the forest that discovered 240 various species of flora and fauna in the forest, as well as included in those were 37 at-risk species. So we now know, we have scientific data to prove how important the forest is. 22 acres of it is over 100 years old. So we know it's an important space that needs to be preserved.
Yeah. And can you tell us a bit about what the city of Pointe-Claire or Cadillac Fairview, the landowner, would like to do with this important forest?
Right. So Cadillac Fairview's only piece of land since 2013. Their intention originally was to develop all of it except for 4 to 5 acres. So the entire forest right now, after the REM's work, is about 43 acres. It was 50 acres to start. Cadillac Fairview owns about 43 acres now, and their intention is to develop it and turn it into office space, residential buildings, commercial space. And that was their intention when they released their plans to the public about 4 years ago. So they have since applied to the provincial government for a permit, which they received from the Ministry of the Environment. They received it in the fall of 2023. 2022, I apologize. So October 2022, they received a permit from the Ministry of the Environment to fill in wetlands and to start their building. But since then, the city of Pointe-Claire has put in a freeze on the piece of land because our city is undergoing a whole redoing their urban plan, basically. So it's in the forest is frozen right now through a interim control bylaw. So until the urban plan is finished, that interim control bylaw should be in place. There's also an interim control bylaw on the part of the CMM for ecological reasons until the new PMAT is completed.
Right. And people used to use this forest to walk their dogs for recreation, that sort of thing. And somebody seems to have put up a fence around it to stop people from going there. What do you think about that?
Yeah, so the community has been using this space for decades. I'd say 50, 60 years. We have one of our members who actually used to ride his bike in the forest when he was a little kid. The community uses it for walking their dogs, for mountain biking. Recently, very recently, Cadillac Fairview did install a fence around the forest, the owners, in May of 2022. So my feeling is that they were not happy with the actions we were taking. And, they just wanted to make sure that nobody enjoyed the forest at all and that the community could not take advantage of it, which I think is a really unfortunate message that they're sending to everyone.
Yeah, it seems to be a
I
very
think it's
hostile
disappointing.
move. A hostile
Yeah,
move to take away something that's not developed yet, right? People could still theoretically use it until the development. Obviously, we want to stop the development altogether, right? But to put up an
100%. Yeah.
obstacle like that seems like a very hostile move. Have you had any discussions with Cadillac Fairview?
Unfortunately, not. We haven't had any discussions with Cadillac Fairview. We are open to having a discussion with them, although putting up the fence was a pretty clear message to us. And they did actually plow into the forest with some heavy machinery at some point. The city stopped them because they didn't have the permit to do that, and then subsequently they put in the fence. But
Yeah.
yeah, I think it sends a pretty clear message to the community about their plans and how they feel about residents in general.
Yeah. And so, you've been involved in protesting and raising this issue through the media. You've had all kinds of reports done in pretty much every single media outlet that covers the area over the last couple of years. Can you tell us what yourself and the people that you work with have done to draw attention to this and to potentially stop the development from going forward?
Yeah, we've knocked on every single door that we think we could. We've been in contact with the provincial government, with municipal government, with the federal government. We've done interviews at multiple levels. We've held events for Earth Day. We've held events for our for each of our big milestone protests, like the 50th, 100th, 150th, just recently. And we were very excited about the study that the Legacy Fund for the Environment commissioned. That was finished in about October. So we were really excited about that. And again, we're present every week on the corner of Fairview Avenue and Brunswick Boulevard in Pointe-Claire. And we're committed to staying there until the forest is protected. And every week we have people stopping and talking to us. So we know that our presence is valuable. And we just recently started a series of events. The first event's going to be on Sunday. It's called Series of Workshops based about nature literacy in the West Island. So our first one's going to be
Great.
about animal tracking taking place at Las Alorme. The next one's going to be about IDing trees in the winter. So they won't take place in Fairview Forest, but I think that, forests don't exist in a bubble. We don't exist in a bubble. They're all interconnected. And I think it's important to gain a greater admiration and appreciation for the nature that surrounds us. So that's why we're running this series of events. So that's what we're doing.
Oh, that's great. And what's been the response so far from both the municipality of Pointe-Claire, maybe the city of Montreal, and the provincial level as well?
Well, as for the city of Pointe-Claire, we've certainly run into some, adversity as to how to move forward with saving the forest there. We are undergoing, the rehashing of our urban plan. So this is the opportunity and this is the time when we could get it zoned into a park, because legally the city would be allowed to do that. Not everybody supports Fairview Forest being made into a park, so there is some dissension on council about that, or saving 100% of it, which we're working on, and it's just something that we have to continue to pay attention to. The CMM level, and of course, we're the city level as well. We're really grateful for both freezes at the city level and the CMM level. So the CMM has acknowledged that the forest has important biodiverse landscape. So the flora and the fauna is exceptional for the area. And so there is the freeze until the end of the PMAD. I think ideally, if we were able to save the forest through funding, that would be, I think that would make all parties kind of happy to some degree. So it would help out the city. And so there is money at the CMM level, there's money at the provincial level. We just have to make that happen. And we've been communicating with them to try to make that happen. We just have to keep pushing that.
I imagine the fact that the City Council of Pointe-Claire not being unanimous in their support for protecting the forest, or not even having the majority of them wanting to turn the forest into a park, as you're suggesting, might be something that could delay the process significantly.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, legally there is that right, but I think, that may or may not be the route that it takes. There's other options out there. And I think that that's the hopeful part for us, is that there are so many options available out there. There's private funding, there is public funding. Governments have committed to putting money towards saving 30% of the green space in southern Quebec. And there's not 30% left in the Island of Montreal right now. There's 23% left. And only 2% of Pointe-Claire's green spaces are in the north of the city, where it is right now. So where Fairview Forest is. And so Fairview Forest is not counting that green space, and only 2%. So we need to do better in Pointe-Claire, especially in that heat island. So there's a lot of reasons and there's a lot of ways to save Fairview Forest. So we just have to keep pushing those arguments. And we are hopeful. There are ways to do this. We just have to have a consensus somehow.
Yeah. Oh, it's really great that you're exploring so many different ways. And it's true that, with those, protection targets, where they throw out a certain percentage, they don't always back it up by, putting actually on the map, okay, where are we going to protect, right? So, I would hope that they would put Fairview Forest as part of, that percentage that they're trying to protect. But, all over Quebec, we see, issues about draining wetlands, about, tearing down forest, some of which are very important for local biodiversity. How does this, push to save the Fairview Forest fit into the larger picture of nature conservation in Quebec?
I love the quote, think globally, act locally. We see things that are happening like at Northvolt with the disruption of those wetlands. I just think it's absolutely unbelievable that the government changed their own laws so they could let that project happen. And that is so frustrating. But those types of things, and what might happen with the Bois Steinberg in eastern Montreal, like we see those things happening, and we are reinvigorated to kind of keep pushing, because this cannot keep happening. Pointe-Claire has a responsibility to its own residents and has responsibility to the Island of Montreal. And therefore, the CMM and the AGLO have to be able to fund, and the province has to be able to fund these types of projects. They know what the consequences of the climate emergency are. And so they have to, proactively make this happen. There are great goals in the PMAD about transit-oriented development. That they want to increase. They want to increase to 200 or 300 homes per hectare. Those are goals, the future goals and the possible future goals for the PMAD. But there's also goals of 30% protection of green space. So we don't have to pick one or the other. They're both goals in the PMAD. That's one of our members keeps bringing this up. They might talk about, the TODs, it's important with the REM station, which is in the corner of the forest, to have density
right, because
around
they
there.
built the REM station. The REM is the new train that the construction is underway for. They chose to build it in the middle of the forest, right?
The CDPQ
like, why wouldn't they not build it where the demand already was, where there's already high density housing? It seems that they would build this REM station in the forest as an argument to develop the forest.
We could go into that discussion for it could go on for a while, but the fact is the REM station is there right now. It's been built on the forest. It could have been built on the parking lot. It wasn't. It was built on the forest. There will be it's a TOD zone within 1 kilometer, but there's also 30% protection of green spaces regulations in the PMAD that will be there. So we can't pick and choose there. We can do both, So I think that's
they could also build those condos they want to build. They could also build them in the parking lot instead of in the forest, right?
Yeah, and they are building them in the parking lot, but to me, construction should stay on previously asphalted spaces. That's,
Yeah.
that's what we think, obviously, as a group. Please keep your development there. We're not anti-development. We've never wanted to get into that debate. But if you are going to build, keep it on spaces that are already asphalted and concrete filled. Like, why would you build on the last green space in that area? We need affordable housing, yes, but none of that's going to be affordable. It's the other reality
No,
of this.
absolutely
But
not.
we're not, yeah, we don't going to get into the, the development debate, the condo debate at all. It's just that our goal is to protect 100% of the forest.
Yeah.
That's
And there's
always been
plenty
our
of
goal.
space to.
Exactly.
There's plenty of space to build housing on places that are already developed, rather than the last forests in town, right?
And think of that
Geneviève,
as
I
a
want to
hub.
thank.
Yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, I want to thank you a lot
yeah.
for taking part in the discussion. And if people want to support Save the Fairview Forest, or they want to take action on this issue, how can they do that?
They can go to our Facebook page. We communicate a lot through Facebook. We have a website, savefairviewforest.org, so fairview.org. They can email us at fairviewforest@gmail.com. We have an Instagram page. We have a Twitter page. We have a lot of events coming up, and they're every Saturday protesting in Pointe-Claire. If somebody wants to just come and have a chat for 10 minutes, we're there. But we love to see new faces, and we're buoyed by new people's presence, and
yeah.
We're just,
well, it's really great. I mean, 168 weeks on the corner through holidays even. And I think it was on
weather,
Christmas, you guys were out there, minus 35 sometimes, plus 35. It's really incredible, the perseverance, that you have with the other people who are involved. So I wish you the best of luck in this. We're going to have a discussion with the mayor also and see what he can do to protect this forest. And of course, we'll continue to follow the issue.
Thank you so much, Alex. Really appreciate the opportunity.
So up next, we've got an interview with the Mayor of Pointe-Claire, Tim Thomas. Now, Tim Thomas is somebody who was elected on an explicit promise to protect the Fairview Forest. In fact, both during the campaign and even after the campaign, once he was elected as mayor, he was out with the citizens protesting on the side of the road to protect the Fairview Forest. As I mentioned in the introduction, he's had a bit of a difficult time of it. There's been a lot of pressure, even intimidation on the part of developers. He was elected as mayor, but does not have the support of the city council, who tends to be a lot more pro-development than he is. So it's led to a lot of power struggles, a lot of really intense and sometimes nasty politics in the city of Pointe-Claire. But I think that's important to speak to the mayor, because this is somebody who has made an election promise, who's standing up for it, and who seems to be doing everything that he can to protect this forest. So we're going to talk with him about what it's been like going through this experience, what some of the limitations are on even having elected office. Even being the mayor of a town doesn't necessarily mean that you can protect everything. But I think that it's important to showcase people who are doing what they can to protect green space. All right, so thank you, Mayor Thomas. It's a pleasure to be here to discuss this issue about the Fairview Forest. I know that it's something that you campaigned on during the election to protect the Fairview Forest, and it's now getting to be about a couple years into the mandate. So I'm interested in hearing how it's been. It's not every day that we see people elected to fight for green space. So could you start off by telling us why it's important to protect the Fairview Forest?
There's a whole bunch of reasons. We're in an environmental crisis. We're dealing with global warming. We have a natural green space. The cheapest and most effective way to protect the environment is simply not to cut things down. Mm-hmm. So it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned. It is the easiest and simplest ecological solution to my mandate, and it's a no-brainer. The other thing that makes it really obviously the right thing to do is the fact that we have two huge developments pending right around that forest. We've got Kirkland's doing the the old Merck Frost site, which will bring thousands of people in. And Cadillac Fairview is presumably going to develop MU1, the other site. Wedged between those two huge developments is a green space.
Right.
Well, one would assume that if we're building huge developments, we should have a requisite green space. Lo and behold, it's already there. It's a real green space. It's an ecological system. It's not a fake one, planted in cement pots with trees that are going to die in 10 or 15 years. And it's an actual green space that will sustain itself. So it's a no-brainer and absolutely should not be touched.
Yeah. And what could the city of Pointe-Claire do in order to protect this green space, assuming that you had the support of council?
Well, I would love to get it purchased by the CMM. I would love to get it purchased by other levels of government who claim to be green. It's a small piece of real estate. I would love to have councillors who would rally with me to have it purchased either by us, although I don't know if we could afford it, or purchased by other levels of government or in conjunction with many others, so that it could be protected finally once and for all and be taken off the vulnerability list. So that's what I would like.
Yeah, and I know that your position on conserving the forest has triggered a bit of a backlash from the developer, who's been aggressively advocating against your position as mayor, and some of the councillors also. Can you talk to us a bit about some of the obstacles that you faced in protecting this space?
Yeah, well, there are two obstacles. I mean, there's the Cadillac Fairview obstacle, which is going after the city in general, but has demonized me in the media, especially when I was first elected, as you know, and my fellow councillors unfortunately have supported Cadillac Fairview. The other one is a personal lawsuit from Sautremont.
I was not aware of that.
Personal.
Yeah.
For $150,000, which is not the most comfortable positions in the world, but that wasn't the forest per se, that was development in general. And that's a charming experience as well. And my council, of course, sided with that developer, particularly in the Aaron Tedford episode that drove her out of office. She spoke to the cutting of trees. She was our tree canopy expert. And she spoke to what was going on that site behind the manoir from St. John's on Hymas towards Stillview. And she basically pointed out all the obvious things that had been done and was chastised by her fellow council members. And they got rid of her, and now I think the sites have been turned on me. So. Right.
So now there's the $150,000 lawsuit hanging over your head, and that's because of your opposition to development in general in Pointe-Claire? Or?
I guess, I mean, the suit is, yes, that I've somehow damaged the economic interests of various developers. And, I mean, I haven't gone after anybody personally. I haven't even been against development. I've just been against the type of development we've been engaged in, which I don't think has been helpful for the environment. It hasn't been helpful for the aesthetic of the community. I don't think our built environment has fit Pointe-Claire in the last 10 or 15 years. We've been building buildings that a lot of people don't like.
Yeah.
We can build. We can go after the missing middle. We can do triplexes, duplexes. We can do all kinds of things. We don't have to build big, ugly buildings.
And what kind of message does it send when the population elects somebody like yourself to protect a green space and to restrict development in the city? Like, you're supposed to be the voice of the people, yet these developers are going after you at the personal level, suing you for $150,000. I know that the mayor job in Pointe-Claire is not particularly well paid. That's at least a couple years' salary. Like, what does this mean to the state of municipal democracy in Quebec?
Well, good question. There are specific types of lawsuits that are designed to influence public opinion. And if they continue to flourish or be allowed to be effective, we've got a problem.
Right. Would you consider this a strategic lawsuit against public participation,
well,
as they call it, a slap suit?
That. I'll let the courts decide that, but it's a possibility.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. And I know that there were some other people that were elected to council to you, well, specifically a woman by the name of Aaron Tedford, who was also, I guess, supporting your plans to protect the Fairview Forest. And after a few months after the election, she resigned, and there was talk about her being intimidated in the city council parking lot after a meeting. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Well, I can't get into too many specifics because it is actually in court as we speak. Councillor Tedford, Councillor Tremblay, myself, and two citizens were confronted in a parking lot by a developer after a city council meeting. And that certainly had some bearing on her comportment. She was also, if you watch the council meeting, there was a council meeting where all her fellow councillors denounced her, one after the other.
I saw that.
Lined up and denounced her, which didn't help. She was speaking her mind. we are presumably in Pointe-Claire a democracy, and a councillor is allowed to justify their vote and explain their vote, which is what she was doing. For her to have been sanctioned by her fellow councillors for expressing herself, for me, remains to this day mind-numbing and disturbing.
And I saw that even after her resignation, and there had been, articles in the press about, this intimidation incident, and I'm sure it maybe wasn't the only factor, right? It's part of many different things that could have contributed to resignation, but some of the councillors seemed to, denounce her for speaking out and tried to say that it wasn't true, it wasn't accurate, and this kind of thing. It's pretty odd, and from my perspective, to see councillors denouncing other councillors who are victims of intimidation.
Yep.
Must have been a bit surprising, or maybe you're not surprised because you've been in the middle of this.
For me, it was shocking, and it remains shocking.
Yeah.
And a real disappointment.
Yeah.
A real disappointment. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. And, I was raised a Democrat, and I firmly believe in democracy, and I've seen a lot of things since I've been in this position that are a tad disappointing.
Yeah. And it's unfortunate because a lot of people, when we knock on the door doing politics, right, like I, knock on doors, get signatures and stuff like that, and every so often somebody will say, oh, you're completely wasting your time in politics. Even if you get to holding the position that you're looking for, the whole system will stop you from moving forward. Do you feel that that's what you're up against with protecting this?
No, I firmly believe that you have to influence political discourse. And you have to influence how people talk and speak and what the subject matter is that people talk and speak about. Mm-hmm. My mentor, one of my mentors, Warren Magnuson, who was a great academic in the 80s and 90s in Canada, wrote that the greatest changes we've seen in our lifetime have happened not because of the nation state, but in spite of the nation state. Mm-hmm. So in other words, environmentalism and feminism have taken hold in the rhetoric of people. And governments can't prevent it. It's becoming so powerful that they have to succumb to the dictates or the will of the people. So the more we're concerned with our environment, the more we're concerned with the status of women in society or the role of women in society, the more governments have to pay attention. And I really still believe, that's what I hold on to as my beacon of hope, public opinion, and I work relentlessly in the media. And I've lost all kinds of fights in my mandate. I lose them all the time, but I like to leave the remnant of what I think was right in people's minds for the next election.
Yeah.
I hope it works. It may not work, but I use that as a beacon of hope.
Well, I definitely agree with that, and I appreciate your optimism because I know also that there's a lot of people that if they were in your position, maybe they would have thrown in the towel or, maybe they would have moved on. But it's nice to see, people who stick to their point and stick to their promises that they were elected on. So I appreciate that. And, we hear a lot about like municipal councillors and stuff like that being intimidated, not just in Pointe-Claire, but in general. And they say that there's, a huge wave of resignations from municipal councils all across the province because of the sort of work climate, with social media and that kind of thing. Is that something significant as well?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it's not just resignation. I mean, the other solution is to just succumb
and just join the fight.
Do what everybody wants,
right?
Right? Which is, I think, the wrong thing, but a lot of people do that one.
Yeah.
And if you want to be a careerist politician, that's more viable way to go.
Yeah.
I did this at the end of my career so that...
Right, that's what I was going to say, is you came into this with a considerable amount of experience for the mayor of this a town the size of Pointe-Claire. You were involved with, I think, Jean Chrétien's
I was in the Privy
government.
Council office.
Yeah.
I was the senior policy analyst in the Department of Intergovernmental Relations. We wrote policy advice for cabinet and the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
And I have a PhD in political science, so I
Right.
sort of have a firmly held belief in it. And I've worked in the Treasury Board, and I taught political science for over a decade. Right. So McGill, Concordia, RMC, and
yeah.
So it was time to walk the walk, and I am.
Right.
I'm trying to live up to what I sort of believe in, and we'll see what happens.
Yeah, perfect. And to come back to the forest, is there a possibility of maybe having some higher density housing authorized, like where the Fairview Mall is or in its parking lot, and then to be able to protect the forest? Because it seems that they're determined to take this last piece of forest, but is there not some sort of a compromise that could be found?
Of course there is. Of course there is. Leave the forest alone. And I think increasingly, I would hope that the public, and not just Pointe-Claire, but all of Montreal region, all of Quebec, focus on this issue, and make the politicians at higher levels really pay attention to this. You can't just go in and cut the last remaining forest in an urban setting
Right.
when you're developing right around it. I mean, yes, I mean, the compromise, do we allow them to go 27 stories so we can save the forest? No. They should be building a reasonable development and saving the forest. We're
Yeah.
in a different era now. You know, like the Illatort Bridge, we should have bicycle and bus lanes.
Yeah.
You know, the plan there is from 1960s, and we've got to start doing things properly. I mean, we're in an environmental crisis.
Absolutely.
You know, so we've got a forest sitting there that's a natural green space for 2 urban developments. Leave it alone.
Yeah.
It costs nothing. You know, you don't have to build a park.
Yeah.
And I hate these. We don't have to build a fake park. I mean, all the environmentalists.
Well, there's already trails and stuff that go through there,
exactly.
but they put up a huge fence,
Well, nice
block
of them,
people, cut it off. What do you think about that?
Well, a statement, a message of intimidation, I would argue. It probably wasn't good for the animals.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it was a statement, and it is privately owned. But we were going in and cleaning it. A lot of the activists were cleaning that forest regularly. Like, they weren't damaging it in any way, shape, or form. They were trying to protect it.
Yeah.
You know? So, sadly, but I guess nobody's using it with the fence there, right? So,
Right. Did they leave space under the fence so the animals could pass through?
I don't know. I haven't checked. They didn't at first. I don't know what the status is now. That was
Yeah.
one of the concerns at the time.
Interesting. And, you know, there's issues about green space like this in all of the different boroughs in the West Island. Have you reached out to Kirkland, for example? I know that the Kirkland border comes very close to the forest. Is it the kind of thing that you can work, you know, across municipalities on?
Well, Michelle Gibson and I often joke. Michelle says, my citizens are going to go and play in Tim's forest.
Yeah.
Which is kind of funny. But he knows. I mean, he's aware that, I mean, it's good for his development as well, the Merck Frost development, which is interesting, and they've done an interesting development there. Their process was interesting because they did it somewhat democratically. So the Kirkland model is of interest to us.
And how did they do it democratically?
Well, they got the constituents involved. They had citizens committees, and
Right.
they had focus groups, and they did it. They paid attention to what people thought and felt in the region, in the area, and tried to incorporate those feelings into the development.
Yeah.
And they did a politically viable development, which could technically happen in Pointe-Claire as well if we get citizens involved, and which is what we're trying to do.
Yeah.
And if the citizens buy into the project, it's a win-win for everybody. So.
And has there been any public consultations with the Fairview Forest?
Well, Fairview Forest, I don't know if you heard, it was dropped from our consultation because of the lawsuit, which is ridiculous. So the lawsuit actually had some bearing on the consultation. Now we're trying to remedy that. That was truly unfortunate.
But this lawsuit is blocking the consultation from going forward?
Well, because there's a lawsuit from the owner of the forest, some of the consultants or some of the consultation was influenced and softened so as not to focus on the forest.
So even
It's the most important issue in Pointe-Claire, but because there's a lawsuit, we're not allowed to look at it.
right, even though they haven't won this lawsuit, nothing has been decided on in court. It's still impacting the public's right to be consulted on the forest.
Drop a hunk of money, and you can influence politics.
Yeah,
Just serve a lawsuit, and you can influence the political outcome.
yeah,
Something wrong with that in my mind.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, listen, I want to thank you for all of your hard work and, you know, for staying firm on your commitment to protect this forest. It's really great because we don't see that from politicians every day. So I appreciate your efforts for that, and we'll continue to follow it.
Thanks.
Well, that concludes this episode of the EcoMindset podcast. I hope that you enjoyed the interviews with both Geneviève Lussier and Tim Thomas. I think that as we've seen in their interviews, people who are trying to protect green space face some big obstacles in Quebec. I'm sure it's the same thing across Canada and around the world, where you have these developers, these capitalists, who want to make money off of land, who want to develop it, and have really very little or no regard for biodiversity and conservation. I think that it's really great that both these people have been standing up for so long, so consistently, to protect this particular green space in the West Island of Montreal. I'd also like to invite you to subscribe on YouTube and also on all of the different podcast platforms. We're available in both video and audio podcasts. Coming up, we've got some really interesting episodes. For one, I've got an interview with the president of a teachers union that was on strike here in Quebec last month. We've also got an interview with somebody who's living in Rouyn-Noranda. It's a large city here in Quebec that has been contaminated by arsenic pollution from a foundry that's located in the middle of the town. So we're going to see what it's like to live in a toxic town. And we've also got an episode about the wildfires that we had here in Quebec in the summer of 2023. I got to sit down with the mayor of one of the towns that's been evacuated because of these fires and get his perspective on both climate change, on wildfire readiness, and a variety of other issues. So if you like this episode, please subscribe. We're going to have a lot more stuff coming up. Feel free to send us suggestions of issues that we should cover, people we should interview. Always looking forward to hearing from the listeners. And I'll see you in the next one.